going on, everybody? It's Rollwide coming at you with a brand new video, and with seemingly no ban list in sight until probably somewhere in June, early June, something like that. I decided that I'm going to bring y'all a brand new hand trap tier list post Cyberstorm access because, yeah, it's really weird. Usually I only do a hand trap tier list like every other month or something like that, but the sheer difference between this format and last month's format is astounding. Like, hand traps are already slowly coming back into the meta over board breakers, but now it's like a really big hand trap meta because so many decks just play around the most common board breakers or the best board breakers overall that most decks can play. And so you'd rather just try and stop them before they can start their combo rather than waiting until their end board's made, because you're gonna get hit with a lot of nasty things. No, like, seriously, I had a super heavy player rip 2 cards out of my hand with Omega in 1 turn and I almost cried. So yeah, with that being said, I don't want to waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get right into my hand trap tier list for the May 2023 format post Cyberstorm access. As always, we're starting off with our girl Ash Blossom, and I'm gonna put her in the solid category because Ash, it's not an Ash Blossom format right now. Like, Ash is definitely still a really good card. You're gonna be still playing against players that play branded and stuff like that, and it's also good against a lot of lower tier matchups and everything. But when it comes to the top tier decks, Ash either doesn't do much or it does like nothing at all. Ash a Kshatri-La player, they're gonna keep playing most likely, and they're gonna rip something out of your extra deck off a Unicorn. You try to Ash a Purely player, they're just gonna activate another quick play spell. You're gonna try to Ash a super heavy player, they're just gonna laugh at you. There are some pretty decent trade-offs with Ash, things like gigantic sprites so that they can't continue their plays for sprite stuff, and also so you don't get A-bleed in certain situations. And again, as I mentioned, against branded is still a really strong card. But it's not the best one you could play, though it's never really gonna leave the solid category in my opinion. The next Ghost Girl is Ghost Belle, and I'm gonna put her in Situational because, similar to Ash, she has her moments, stopping things like Branded Expulsion and random certain other effects, like hitting a super heavy Samurai Scarecrow isn't the worst thing, though they will have a Soul Peacemaker still. It's another hand trap that you kind of have to draw it alongside something else to do anything really meaningful, and on top of that, it's just kind of weaker than Ash overall, so really, I delegate it to the side if you play it at all. Unless you're playing a deck like Super Heavy or Purely and you're playing like 18 billion hand traps. Next up are the Bystials, and I'm gonna put the Bystials, top of Situational, bottom of Solid. I'm gonna put them at the top of Situational. I think Bystials are actually fine right now. They're really good in certain strategies that want the extra level 6 extension. The Super Heavy player I was playing against was actually playing Bystial Super Heavy, and that allowed him to stop my Dinomorphia plays because I was playing Dinomorphia at the time. And it's also really good in like that Thunder Chaos pile that a bunch of people are hyping up, and then it's actually a pretty decent side deck engine. You want to play like Ball Drake and some Magna Mutts, or maybe even a Druis Worm in your side. Really good in the branded matchup to stop things like the Expulsion. Like, they're not the most amazing hand trap you could play, but in the side, they're not the worst thing you could play either. Our first don't recommend is going to go to Chaos Hunter. Again, as I mentioned in my last one, I mean, you're just gonna go against like a Kshatri-La player, like, you know, the one matchup this is really good in, other than maybe Runic, which also has an out to it. They're probably just gonna either thrust, or they're gonna triple T, or they're gonna hit you with a big eye and just steal it and make another level 7. Like, there's really no point in going for Chaos Hunter. Our first in the high impact category is actually going to be Droll. So Droll, I believe, was either in Solid or Situational 2 tier lists ago, then peaked towards the upper part of Solid in the last tier list, but now Droll is quite possibly the strongest hand trap in the meta. This card can either hamper or severely stop just about any deck in this current format. You draw a Cash player, they're gonna have to rely on having a really stacked hand in order to continue any of their plays. You draw a Purely player, the same goes for there. And then you draw a Super Heavy player, and they're gonna be begging on their knees for mercy because they can't play anything like Called By or Crossout to stop it. You can always tell the format's going to be really fun when everybody and their grandma's maining Droll and Lockbird instead of putting it in the side, if not playing it at all. But yeah, I think Droll, out of all the hand traps on this list, is absolutely the one that you should have, and definitely be maining if you can afford to, in my opinion. It just stops so many decks right now. Like, literally all but branded can either die to or get really hurt by Droll. Next up on our list, we have Contact C, and I'll put it in Situational because in certain matchups, like, for example, I think Purely, Contact C would actually not be too bad unless they link it off, because they won't be able to use the effect of the Purelies on field in order to summon the Xyz monsters. And then, of course, certain branded players that aren't prepared with, like, Sprint or anything, it can hit both of them, but other than that, it just doesn't really do too much. I mean, Cash is just going to link it off into Donner. I mean, actually, it's not that bad against Cash either because they do have to link off into Donner in order to get rid of it. But then also you got decks like Super Heavy. It's just like, congratulations, you just gave him a free level 6 to go into an extender. Like, personally, it's not something I would be caught with, but I mean, if you get nothing better, then like you maybe can't afford some like the higher end hand traps, then it's not really the worst card you could play. Next up, we have DD Crow, and as much as I love DD Crow, I am a bird up enthusiast. I don't think DD Crow is very great right now. Unless you're playing it as part of an engine, I wouldn't recommend it. Another card gracing our high impact category is Dimension Shifter, joining with Droll and Lockbird as one of the most toxic hand traps in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! And both of these cards are just so strong right now. So Shifter, while it's not very good against Castra, keep in mind Castra isn't the very dominant meta threat it once was, because it's not like the best undisputed deck right now. While it is the only deck to really guarantee pie chart success, it's still got to deal with Super Heavy, which dies to Dimension Shifter, Purely, which dies to Dimension Shifter, and so many other decks which just die to Dimension Shifter. So like, we're once again entering a format similar to tier format, probably not as bad to be fair, but similar to tier format in that if your deck can even remotely play Shifter, it's very recommended to play Shifter so that you can just stop your opponent from playing and try to go for the kill on the next turn. Next we have Gamma, and I'm very pleased to announce that Gamma is going in the high impact category. So Gamma's a pretty cool hand trap, and especially right now, because a lot of decks are using it to insulate their plays, or as a really high impact hand trap when going second. So Gamma's seeing a lot of play specifically in decks like Purely and Super Heavy, because of cards like Ash and Ogre. While they aren't like the biggest threats, they can be a nuisance depending on your hand. But if you open Gamma on top of your combo starters like Wakaushi for Ogre and the Purely quick plays and everything, then you can not only stop that hand trap, but you can also get a free Omega or any other level 8 Synchro or Link 2 you could really dream of. So there's really not a reason to play, and that's just going to give you so much advantage. I love the fact that Gamma, because of Omega, is basically a like 2-for-1 trade. Like, you're getting rid of 2 cards in their hand for the price of just a Gamma, and you're getting that driver out of your deck for deck thinning later. I think it's going to continue to see success in a format where hand traps continue to dominate, and where going second you need as much disruption as you can get. Next on our list is Ghost Sister, and Ghost Sister, like I said, is always going to go in solid as long as we have the time rules. This is definitely a cheeky card in your side deck that can just win you free matches that you shouldn't be winning otherwise, so I'd put it in solid for a long time. Next on our list is No Material, and hey, it's getting better. It's getting better. I want to put it in Situational, because this card is actually, I'm going to put it actually above. I'm going to put it above because I think No Material right now could catch a lot of people off guard. It was already just okay in the last few formats, but right now you have decks like Purely that might not even be able to extend through a No Material on their Purely on field. I think that's pretty funny, not to mention you can hit things like the Soul Piercer on the Super Heavy field, I believe, right? Or am I tripping? Wait a minute. No Material says Special Summon, right? Ah, dang. That would have been funny. Okay, that would have been funny. Also, it says you have to control no cards, so it's only on the going second sort of deal. But, like, you can still get away with hitting, like, a Wakaushi or something with this after they special the Wakaushi, so they can't put it back in the scale. And that can stop them from pendulum summoning, which I think is pretty funny. I personally still wouldn't recommend it, but if you have it and you want to take a shot at it, I think it could be really hilarious to pull off at your locals. Next on our list, we have Orange Light, and I'm going to put it in Don't Recommend strictly because there's not really a deck that can make great use of it. Even a deck like Drytron, that was probably one of the better decks to actually use it. It kind of has to deal with Droll and Dimension Shifter right now, which is like its worst cards in the game. So yeah, unless Purely players are walking up with their 6 Light Fairies in the main and an Orange Light, I wouldn't recommend playing Orange Light right now. Next up is Imperm, and Imperm is a really good card that I don't know if I want to put it above or below Ash. I'm going to put it above Ash because it does avoid Gamma. Not to mention hitting a Purely on board can be really good with Imperm because they might not be able to grab another quick play spell in order to actually see someone with. You can hit a Super Heavy Samurai Scarecrow or something in order to prevent them from getting that Soul Piercer back, though keep in mind they will still have the Soul Peacemaker 90% of the time. But it's still pretty nice against Castra as well if they don't already open Theosis or Birth, which I mean good luck with that, but you know what I mean. And on top of that, if you top deck it going second, it's still a board breaker at the end of the day, albeit not an amazing one. It can out things like Appaloosa, Baron, etc. So it's it's going to be at the top of the solid category. Next up is Kelbeck, and in a similar vein to Orange Light, it's going to go in the don't recommend category. Again, decks are still playing it if they're playing an Ishizu engine, but that's even if they do play this, because I notice a lot of decks playing Ishizu engines are kind of just sticking to the one Keldo, one Mudora in case they want to discard it. I believe Purely actually might be utilizing it. Correct me if I'm wrong there. I think I saw a few lists actually playing it because you can discard it, similar to like the Dark World cards. But Kelbeck, though, as a whole, I don't really see seeing too much play. Not to mention, you don't really want to mill your opponent much this format. Next on our list is Lancia, and I'd put Lancia in Situational because why would you want to stop your opponent from banishing things most of the time when you want to be banishing their things with Dimension Shifter? This really only works against Castra, so there's no real reason to put it above Situational because it's just going to be for the Castra matchup. Next on our list is Ghost Mourner, and I'm actually going to put Ghost Mourner at the bottom of Solid. It's a pretty good alternative hand trap on top of something like Valor in your super heavy list because you can just play so many hand traps, same with Purely and all those other decks that can play a bunch of hand traps. Though it's only going to go towards the bottom of Solid because those are the only real situations in which you're playing Ghost Mourner, not because it's great, but because you want to play more hand trap names and you can't play back row. Next up is Nib, and I think Nib is still a pretty solid card. Depending on if you have another hand trap with it, you can hit a super heavy player with it. You can also still hit Castra really well with it. I mean, Castra still has no real out to it other than cross out. And then you might be able to sneak it in against a branded player as well during the end of their main phase. They might not actually have an out to it, and that can stop them from maybe even expulsion locking you, especially again if you open it with another hand trap, especially something like Ash Blossom. But against most super heavy players, when they open fine and you don't have another hand trap, or against Purely especially, it's not really going to be doing too much. And then against Sprite as well, it's not really doing anything because they're just going to go Gigantic most of the time first. So Nib is like okay. I'm definitely putting it in the solid category because it is a blowout against the decks that it does work against, especially rogue decks. But it's not something you have to be maining anymore, especially this format. Next on our list is Ogre, and Ogre is actually in a really good spot. So you can Ogre a Wakaushi if they don't have Gamma, if you're confident they don't have Gamma, or you can save the Ogre for a big Benkei so that they don't actually get the search for the Soul Piercer potentially. You can use it on a Purely if they don't have Happy Memory, because if you hit a Purely when they don't have Happy Memory, then they're not going to be able to use the effect to get that Xyz summon on board. It's still not the worst trade against a Castra monster. It's still really good against Gigantic Sprite. I mean, you just completely shut off Gigantic Sprite. It's probably not a card I'd consider maining. I was at first, and then I remembered Gamma was a card, and the best cards that you can hit, you can get Gamma while you go for it. But it's definitely something I'd test out in the side if you have the room for it, or maybe the main if you're playing a hand trap heavy list like Super Heavy or Purely. But I think Ogre is like a kind of like almost sneaky good, but it's kind of like pretty well known, so it's just a really good option that you could play this format in my opinion. I wouldn't be caught without it, not gonna lie. Next on the list is Phantasme, and y'all, Phantasme is kind of terrible still. I mean, I never liked the card, I never really will. Token Collector is also not in an amazing spot right now. I mean, like, Sword Soul is still a deck. I keep forgetting to bring up Sword Soul in these kinds of lists. I mean, it does work against them, but like, why? Why would you do that? In a similar vein to Ghost Mourner, Effect Valor is going to be going in the solid category, probably just above it. Valor, as always, is just a really good extra hand trap if you have the room for it that you can just slap on top of the other hand traps. It's not a hard once per turn. You can open it alongside other hand traps. It's just an imperm that you can only use on the opponent's turn, but that's not really that big of a deal. As much as I love Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries, I'm gonna have to put her in the bottom of don't recommend because, like, usually I put her like usually in the middle of don't recommend, high don't recommend, but there are just so many viable decks right now that unless you're playing a dedicated stun deck that has an entire extra deck full of one-ofs for certain decks, there's just too many decks to keep track of with Ghost Reaper, and way too many of them don't have any set cards in their extra that they desperately need. Like, what are you gonna do, hit a Rise Heart? I mean, they're just gonna use all their other rank 7s. And finally, we have Retaliating Sea, and Retaliating Sea actually isn't a bad card right now, don't get me wrong, or a bad card for its effect, I should say, because, you know, Dimension Shifter is really good, right? So you'd think Retaliating Sea would be really good. Well, the problem with Retaliating Sea isn't its effect, but its activation condition, because your opponent has to special summon via a spell effect, and let's see. Shifter's good against Super Heavy. They don't special summon via spell effect. It's good against Purely, don't get me wrong, I'll admit that right there, it's really good against Purely. Castra doesn't care about Shifter, nor do they care about Retaliating Sea. Sprite doesn't really care about it either very much, not gonna lie. Sword Soul doesn't care about it, they can honestly play Shifter. And yeah, you can use it against Branded, it's probably one of the easiest ones to go against, but why would you do it against Branded if that's not gonna stop you from getting expulsion locked? Like, this is the one point where Retaliating Sea's banish effect is actually not bad, it's just a summoning condition that's just kinda terrible. And with all that being said, it looks like that's going to do it for my hand trap tier list for May 2023. I know it's a bit quicker than I usually do, but I'm trying not to be like super in-depth when most of you know these things already. It's just mostly me like ranking them in general and then elaborating certain other things about the format specifically. So I hope I didn't go on for any rants for too long about certain cards. Not gonna lie, I think this is a fairly accurate list. I think hand traps are really, really important right now, and this is probably a pretty decent template in order to follow, but I don't know, if that's just my opinion, let me know yours out in the comments below, because that's gonna do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll put this video and the channel into recommended, and if you like this content, you want to see more like it, like the rest of my tier list, I will have a board breaker tier list coming up in a few days as well. Then perhaps consider subscribing, because I want to 5,000 subscribers by the end of 2023, not to mention it supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. And if you want to support me directly while also getting some awesome TCG merchandise, then check out Tapio cards in the link in the description. Be sure to use code Aurora5 at checkout for 5% off of your purchase and to support me directly. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.